Deaths on mountains serve as a reminder that the inhospitable mountains we so dearly want to summit are, after all, uncaring. One misstep or a bad stroke of luck, and a person's life is forfeit. In today's video, we will be looking at the unfortunate tragic deaths of a French climber who disappeared on Makalu, a captain of a fire department who fell to his death on K2, and a wing commander of RAF who slipped and fell down a cliff on Broad Peak. One of the saddest tragedies in the history of mountaineering is the death of Jean-Christophe Lafayette. Lafayette was a French climber known as a mountaineering prodigy. From a young age, he climbed Sus multiple times, helping make it popular as a climbing venue. Afterwards, he moved on to greater adventures. Lafayette made various difficult climbs on Mont Blanc. He was also invited to an expedition of Annapurna by Pierre Billin. However, during the climb, Pierre Billin fell to his death. Since the expedition only consisted of the two climbers, Lafayette was left on his own on one of the most difficult points in the climbs. Here, the unmatched skills of Lafayette came in handy, and with his great agility, he climbed down a 75-degree cliff. Then, while trying to save himself, he broke his arm, but after several arduous days, he was able to get himself to safety. After a long break due to his incident, Lafayette began climbing again, making attempts at Cho Oyu, Gasherbrum 1, Gasherbrum 2, and Manaslu. But his great feat was yet to come when he chose to attempt the climb of Makalu. Makalu is the fifth greatest mountain in the world, standing at 8,481 meters. In December 2005, Lafayette decided to make a solo ascent of Makalu. This was a very bold undertaking since Makalu is one of the hardest mountains to climb solo. At the time, such a climb was considered suicidal since no one thought that a person could do it all alone, especially in the winter. But Lafayette was not about to be put off by the danger. He was determined to make the ascent of Makalu and be the first one to climb it alone in the winter. Not only that, but he was also going to attempt the climb without oxygen. At the time, he was 40 years old. Lafayette began his ascent from base camp, laboring against the rough terrain and the arduous climb. After making his advanced base camp, hauling heavy loads high up the mountain, he was making decent progress, but the weather conditions worsened a lot during this time. By the time he reached the col at Makalu La, the wind had gotten extremely strong, so much so that his tent was completely destroyed. He himself was blown away twice, but somehow remained uninjured. Lafayette had no choice but to retreat back to safety. Once back at the camp, he had to wait for the weather to clear up once again so he could continue the ascent of Makalu alone. 2 weeks would go by before the weather improved enough for Lafayette to continue the climb. On 24 January, he set off again, ready to make it to the summit this time around. He was once again able to make good progress. On the 27th, he had his camp made just 1,000 meters before the summit. He was so close to reaching the peak. He had pitched his camp on a small ledge. On either side of the camp were slopes filled with rocks and snow, going down into the deep valleys of the Himalayas. Above him was nothing but the summit, looming high up. He was now ready to make the final climb. A successful summit would have made history. However, the adventure of Lafayette was about to come to a quick, saddening end. Throughout the ascent, Lafayette had been in contact with his wife Kasia, using a satellite phone. It was his one comfort during the highs and lows of the expedition. In the morning, he again made contact with his wife, telling her he was up and moving and he would try to reach the summit that day. Then he started to make preparation for the upcoming ascent. He ate, put on his gear, and took all the necessary provisions. Before leaving, he called his wife again. This would be the last time he was heard of ever again. The climb to the summit would have taken hours upon hours of continuous climbing, so the next communication was expected to happen quite a while later. But no matter how much time passed, no call came through. Lafayette had disappeared. Unfortunately, it was a wish of Lafayette to be alone on his expeditions coming true that led to the inability of a rescue attempt to be made. There were no rope mates, porters, or climbers with him. Plus, at the moment, there happened to be no climber around who was sufficiently acclimatized to reach the altitude at which Lafayette had gone missing. Additionally, there were no other expeditions nearby either. The base camp gave up on rescuing Lafayette after 1 week of his disappearance, A helicopter flight was later conducted to try and spot his body, but there was no success. In the end, the body of Lafayette was never found. Although Lafayette's fate is unknown, at least he passed away doing what he loved, attempting a climb alone with only the cliffs, mountains, and valleys that he loved so much surrounding him. Lafayette is succeeded by his wife Kasia and his 3 children. Serge Du Sable was a captain of Montreal's fire department with a passion for mountaineering. Serge was known by his friends and family to be a very careful and experienced climber. Although he had made several ascents before, this time around, his venture was a treacherous K2. K2 is the second tallest mountain in the world, but it may be the deadliest mountain to climb in the world as well. Standing at 8,611 meters, this giant has some of the most difficult climbing sections that test the resolve of even the most experienced mountaineers. Plus, K2 is known for being very inhospitable. The weather is usually very bad, resulting in dangerous environmental hazards such as thick snow and strong winds, posing a constant danger for the climbers. Serge had a past with K2. He had previously tried to join an expedition to summit K2 in 2016. However, the notoriously bad weather of K2 resulted in the cancellation of the expedition. So in 2018, Serge was once again ready to take on this great undertaking. He would be leading an expedition of his own. The members of his team included Natalie Fortin, Benoît Lamoureux, and Maurice Beauséjour. But before the main climb could begin to summit K2, the team needed to acclimatize themselves to the extreme heights they would be climbing. For this, they intended to spend a night at Camp 2 of K2. The ascent to Camp 2 was going well, and the morale was high. The team made quick progress and reached Camp 1 from the base camp. Soon, they also reached Camp 2. Here, as planned, they spent the night so their bodies could acclimatize to the higher altitudes. So far, the journey had been going very well. In the morning, it was time for the expedition to make its way down the mountain, but the tragedy would strike at this time. The plan was to climb back down to base camp and wait for suitable weather conditions to summit K2. With this, Serge would have become the first climber from his province to summit K2 at the age of 53. But first, the descent to the base camp had to be made. Serge decided to make his way down 30 minutes before his partner Fortin. However, it seemed this descent would end in a calamity for Serge. As he was making his way downwards, suddenly he fell. Serge was an experienced climber who was very careful during his climbs, so such a thing for all intents and purposes shouldn't have happened. But unfortunately, this tragedy had indeed occurred. The fall proved fatal for Serge. He died very soon afterwards. His body was found by his fellow team member in a high porter. Even his fellow climbers seemed unsure about the reason behind the fall, with Fortin saying, "We don't know what happened, but the fall was fatal. It's very difficult here. I keep thinking about the close family I know. It's terrible." Although the grief lay heavy on their heart, the body of Serge had to be retrieved so it could be laid to rest. The retrieval was successful, and the body was sent to advanced base camp. From there, it was taken to Islamabad. There has been a lot of speculation about what could have caused the fall of Serge. What is known is that Serge fell near Camp 2. According to Dawa Sherpa, Serge had fallen from House's Chimney. House's Chimney is a crack in a rock wall of K2, which is part of the normal route used by climbers during their ascent to the summit. The nearby Sherpas also said that the fall was caused by Serge clipping onto one of the older ropes. On various parts of K2, there are nets of old ropes that have been left there. Since these ropes have been exposed to the harsh climate and temperature of K2, they are usually considered to be unstable, prone to snapping or coming loose. Hence why most climbers avoid clipping onto them while climbing. It is possible that by accident or by thinking that the old rope was stable enough for bearing his weight, Serge had clipped onto one during his descent. The rope gave away, sending Serge plummeting down the mountain. However, the exact reason behind the fall cannot be known. The House's Chimney is also a very difficult part to climb up or down, even though it is located at a pretty low altitude. Whatever the reason may be, the death of Serge was a great loss for the mountaineering community and his family. He was well loved at his fire department. In his remembrance, the flags of his fire station in Du Sable were flown at half-staff. His photo was also placed at the door. The expedition that Serge was leading was cancelled after the loss of his life. Although most deaths in the mountains are of hobbyists and professional climbers, sometimes the casualties occur for people trying to do their job. Gordon Henderson was a wing commander in the RAF, the United Kingdom's Royal Air Force. A father of two, Gordon was part of an expedition with the intent of climbing the length of the Baltoro Glacier conducted. Afterward, they were to visit the Broad Peak and K2 base camps and then ascend to Gondogorola Pass. The expedition was successful in climbing through Baltoro Glacier. However, it was during their ascent of Broad Peak that an unfortunate incident happened to Gordon. Broad Peak is the 12th highest mountain in the world at 8,051 meters, and Gordon and his team were tasked with climbing its summit. Broad Peak is a very difficult and dangerous climb. However, despite these difficulties, Gordon and his team were ready to take on the challenge. Their ascent was going very well. There were no significant incidents during the climb, and the weather was also on their side for most of the climb. The expedition reached all the way up only 39 feet from the summit. The goal of this mission was so close at hand. All that was left to do was to climb over the crest and head to the top. With Gordon was Mr. Casanelli, a mountain guide and a climber who was there to summit Broad Peak as well. Unknown to either of them, something very unfortunate was about to happen, and Casanelli would be the witness to the whole incident about to occur. As both climbers were there, ready to take on the last few obstacles in their way, they looked at each other. Mr. Casanelli gave the nod to Gordon, indicating he should be the first one to start climbing over the crest, a show of courtesy from one climber to another. What happened next shook Mr. Casanelli to his core. Gordon was wearing a rucksack on his back. After seeing the nod, he turned around to begin his ascent. Gordon was only about to take one step forward when his rucksack struck against the rock face of the mountain. This was enough to throw him off balance. He slid just for a moment, and then he was gone. Gordon had fallen headfirst down the steep cliff of Broad Peak. Not a cry or a sound escaped Gordon's mouth as he slipped. This silent tragedy stopped Casanelli dead in his tracks. He couldn't do anything but stare in horror. It seemed he had lost all his senses. According to Casanelli, he was speechless, rooted to the spot. He stayed immobile for quite a while, clutching his ice axe with his crampons planted in the ice and snow. However, soon Casanelli came back to his senses. Although he was so close, he abandoned all attempts at making a climb to the summit. Instead, he immediately started making his way back down to Camp 3, which was the closest climbing camp to his position. Once he reached the camp and informed his colleagues of Henderson about what had happened, they wanted to ensure that he had actually seen Gordon and not someone else. So they showed Casanelli one of the pictures of Gordon. Casanelli confirmed that that was a person he had seen fall. This incident showed that when mountaineering at such great heights and under such difficult conditions, even a small misstep can result in tragedy. Gordon only had his rucksack get caught on some rocks, and the unforgiving terrain of Broad Peak claimed his life. A fall from such a steep cliff certainly meant death. Also, since he had fallen head first, the chances of survival were near zero. Soon after the incident, Gordon was declared missing and probably dead. It is chilling to think that if Casanelli had not been there to witness the incident, the disappearance of Gordon would have probably gone unresolved. The RAF made a statement regarding the event, saying they were deeply saddened to announce that Wing Commander Gordon Henderson is reported missing, believed killed on Broad Peak, Pakistan. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family. Gordon Henderson was a veteran soldier. He had served in Afghanistan for his country. He studied at Heriot-Watt University. Gordon Henderson left behind 2 children and his wife, Carrie.